Hi, this is Brendan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for another episode of Wuxia Workshop. And today we're going to be talking about a film called Reign of Assassins, which is a 2010 film. It's directed by Su Chaopin, but it's also often credited to John Woo because he played such a big role in it, and he was, I believe, one of the producers. And it stars Michelle Yeoh and is... I don't know, it's kind of like her return to martial arts cinema, because I think before this, I'm not 100% sure, but I think like Crouching Tiger might have been her most recent martial arts film prior to this. I could be wrong about that. But it had been a while, I think. And so it's so, you know, it's kind of a just for that alone, it's worth checking out. But the film it's meant to be sort of a Gulong-inspired movie. It kind of gets at a lot of the similar things where they have lots of characters and mystery, and it involves the MacGuffin of the Bodhidharma and this organization called Darkstone, which Michelle Yeoh's character belongs to at the beginning of the film. They're a group of assassins, and they want to get this Bodhidharma. It's like it's the Buddhist monk who brought kung fu to China, and the after they acquire it by massacring this family, she decides to leave with it and to exit the martial world. And she gets essentially like primitive reconstructive surgery and seeks out a new life, I think in Luoyang or something. And she meets a guy named Ah Sheng who she falls in love with and marries, but then her past comes back to haunt her. And that's kind of the basic premise of the movie. Did I miss any key things, Joel, or does that get at the heart of the film?
That's the heart of it. Yeah, I mean, like, the devil, of course, is in the details, especially with a movie like this, where, like, everything comes full circle very cleanly and very completely, and there's a lot of little, like, blink and you miss it scenes that are actually really critical to the way the plot works. So, I mean, like, granted that's the big, like, fundamental basis of the movie and the broad strokes of it. Of course, you left out the wonderful resolution, but I'm sure we'll get to that here pretty shortly.
And what did you think of the movie? Because I think this was your first time seeing it, right? You had known about it for a while, though, right?
Yeah, I heard about it when it first came out. A lot of my friends were really into it. But back then, I wasn't super into kung fu movies, so I was just like, I'll just give it a pass. I'll watch it later. So later, finally came. I was actually asked for recommendations for this Wuxia workshop, and on the Discord, someone recommended Reign of Assassins, and I was like, you know what? I've been meaning to watch that. I'll give that a try. So I rented it on Amazon. It was like $4. It's not very expensive. And got to watch it. As far as my thoughts, let me see. It was really entertaining. In a lot of ways, it feels like a really strong continuity from the kind of 70s kung fu movies we've been watching. Like, a lot of the plot elements are really, like, they're very classic. They kind of tread in those footsteps. It's got a really strong claim as a wuxia movie because it's got all those wonderful wuxia elements of secret societies and kung fu MacGuffins and all sorts of nifty stuff like that. There's also a lot of special techniques and fighting styles and weaknesses and strengths thereof, and there's a lot of master and student relationships, all of which are really that make that wonderful rich wuxia weave we really enjoy in movies. So that all those elements are there, but there's a lot of modernization of like the way that action scenes are shot that's really fluid and very beautiful and very striking visually.
But still kind of classic, wouldn't you agree? It's still kind of rooted in the classic style. It doesn't feel. It's not like shaky cam stuff or any.
No, it's not that kind of more that muddled kind of mid 2000s action stuff. This feels like a stronger continuation, and actually, like looking at it from the 70s movies through the 90s movies to this much more recent movie. You said this was like a 2010 movie.
Yep.
Like it feels like this is a clean evolution of the same kind of action staging and shooting techniques. So that was wonderful to. It's really entertaining just to look at, like visually. It's really arresting, and it does a great job bringing forward the action. Let me see. Plot wise, I was really impressed. A lot of times with 70s movies, I don't know if it was the Shaw Brothers being like doing that kind of golden age of Hollywood thing where they would slam out movie after movie. I don't know if it was maybe a more cleanly Chinese cultural thing. I don't know if. But a lot of times when I'm watching the 70s movies, like, plotting-wise, I'll be like, wait, where did that guy come from? And I'll just be like a little bit, I'll be like a half step behind the movie. That was much more pronounced when we started this, by the way. Now it's a little closer, and I'm a little more familiar. But this one I never had that moment with. Even though like, admittedly, like I said, there's a lot of blink and you miss it scenes. There's a lot of stuff where, like, oh, she stabbed that guy? Who is that guy? Oh, yeah, it's that dude. Like, the beginning of the movie really slams you through a pretty significant amount of backstory, and that comes up and informs the rest of the movie.
Yep.
So you really got to pay attention during those first 5 minutes. But even with that, I never felt lost. I never felt like I was behind the movie's little learning curve, you know? So I don't know if that's just them modernizing it. I don't know if that's a Western movie influence. I don't know.
I think,
it made it really...
I think they just did a good job with it. I think they...
Perhaps.
There's a lot of characters in the movie, like you have with a lot of those 70s Shaw Brothers movies. In fact, that was one of their goals, was to make a lot of characters for the film, but you don't ever get lost by them. And I think it's simply due to the, number one, you had mentioned the simplicity of the plot before the podcast, and I think the simplicity of the plot helps, but also they sort of drop the characters in at moments that just you don't get thrown off. Like when the two Taoist characters, who are kind of like, they're like the reverse of Zhao Longnu and Yang Guo. They're like the teacher and disciple who have fallen in love, but they're more like a really wicked, awful couple. And they're the ones that try to rob the Bodhidharma from the crippled magistrate. You're not confused by them at all. They introduce them, and then they follow up the introduction with the action scene. So you kind of get like, I feel like in this movie they do a very good job of planting a lot of seeds, and then the seeds. When the seeds, yield fruit, it's not surprising. You're not confused by it. Do you know what I mean? So, you just see it, throughout the film. Like, for example, the whetstone scene. Do you know what I mean?
The whetstone scene, that was a good one.
Yeah, she calls attention to, like, she's following Ashung around. The turquoise character is following around. She's like, he's a stupid man. He just shovels dung all day and walks around. The only interesting thing he did was buy a whetstone. And that was like the one clue that's I think why Michelle Yeoh doesn't freak out when she drops the melon on the table and says that she just chopped off his head. Because I think when she mentions that he bought the whetstone, Michelle Yeoh starts to get a clue that maybe he can handle himself. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because why would you buy a whetstone as a dung shoveler?
But yeah, so what was your overall impression? Did you like it? Did you think it was a good movie? Did you where would you rank it?
Let me see. In the great ranking of things, I do prefer my movies a little more gonzo, as you know. So this was a lot more grounded than I would usually prefer. Despite that admittedly minor and preferential criticism, I did quite enjoy the movie. Could have used a little more action. I felt like the action scenes that we got were fantastic. Would have liked a little more, maybe a little longer. Let me see. A few more techniques I think would have rounded it out. What was the blood rain spattering sword, or whatever it was called?
The water shedding sword, I think.
Water shedding sword. That was the technique.
Yeah.
That got mentioned, and there should have been a little bit more named techniques. I feel like, because
we did get other techniques. They just didn't often give them the names, and we got the ones that the monk taught her, which were also kind of part of her arsenal. But they were like finding clarity in obscurity, and what were some? There were all these contradictions that were kind of meant to yield an insight. I think there were 4 moves that he taught her.
Yeah, and also I'd like to point out that scene really telegraphed that monk was going to die, because everything was in 4s, and in 4 is basically the death number in Chinese. I don't want to say mythology. I want to say superstition.
Yeah, the number can mean death, and
because even at the beginning of the scene, he was like, "I'm going to be a monk in just 4 days," and immediately I was like, "That guy is toast. You're not getting out of the scene alive, brother."
And it's kind of funny because a Western audience might have the opposite reaction. Because 4 is a perfectly agreeable number in Western.
Yeah, it doesn't have any connotation here.
Yeah. So
next to 13 days, we'd be like, "Uh-oh."
Yeah.
A little different.
So I thought, I thought that whole one of the so I just want to say right off the bat, this is one of my favorite Wuxia films. It might be vying for my favorite. Like if I had a top 3, this would be up there with The Bride with White Hair and something like Death Duel or Hero Shed No Tear. Depending on my mood of the week, which one I'm putting in there. But this is up there. And I would also say, like The Bride with White Hair, I think it's a nearly perfect movie. Like I think there's nothing I would change about the film. It's the martial arts are great, but we also have a really great story. We have a love story at the heart of the movie. There's also a story of spiritual transformation and redemption over the course of the film, but it's not easily earned redemption. It's like a very difficultly obtained.
That was a good center to this movie, I felt like. And they keep bringing back that bridge metaphor time and time again. So, like, that was really good. And there's a lot of, like, powerful but subtle elements that make it really fun to watch.
Well, I'm not going to lie.
As highly as you.
I cried a lot during this movie when I first saw it, and I still cry when I see it. And I think it's because it's a very moving film, not just because of the love story aspect, but because of the. And Joel's making some faces to mock me, but
it's really sweet. I'm a little moved and charmed by how genuinely you emotionally reacted to this movie.
It's a very moving film because it's not just the love angle. It's bringing in sort of that spiritual angle and like the. I don't know. Anytime they have a movie about characters that like are desperate to leave the martial world behind, and they have all this drama, it just kind of I find it carries a lot of weight. But then when you add in the whole like all those scenes with the Buddhist master that she's talking to, and he's trying to help her sort of let go of her attachments to what's happened and all these things. I just find those scenes moving. I find the scenes with her and Ashung moving. I find just the whole film just has this emotional tug to it that in part is due a lot to the acting. There's a lot of really good actors in the movie, like Michelle Yeoh is great.
There is a beautiful wuxia waltz between the writing, the acting, the chemistry, and the casting.
Yep.
Like I hear you there, because you're right. And that is an undeniable thing. Even not ranking this in my personal preferential favorites, that is undeniably a strength of this movie.
Well, and also, like you mentioned, the bridge. So much of this film, it's so simple, but there's so many little details that just kind of all perfectly balance each other. The bridge thing is when the monk dies, he basically declares her love for her by quoting, I think one of the Buddha's disciples who was in love with a woman and said something to the effect of, "If I could become a bridge and endure 500 years of rain and all this stuff, just so she can walk over me." Like that's true to devotion. But what's really interesting is that's mirrored against the Wheel King, who is in love with Turquoise and buries her under a bridge so that when he walks over, he can see her every time. It's like I just like how everything can be centered on that bridge metaphor, and they're just, I don't know, it's just one of these movies that just has all these like it's kind of like a diamond. Do you know what I mean? It's just it's perfect in so many ways.
It revisits and it does kind of revolve around the gravity of a few extremely simple but powerful themes. There's a lot of facets to the way it explores those themes. I think that bridge metaphor right there is a good one, because it's not the last time they come to it. In the very end of the movie, they come to it as well, and she says the bridge is a version of that same little bridge saying to the guy. She's stabbing him to save his life, ironically. So there's a lot of stuff like that shows you like it's a wonderful exploration of how the characters interact with the enormous things they have to deal with in their lives, like their responsibilities and their relationships and like the titanic forces of the world they're dealing with.
Well, so like there's a
go ahead. I was meandering off, but like it really is something. It's something to watch. Again, if they just named some more kung fu techniques, though, I think it would have been absolutely perfect.
Well, and it's a movie that's kind of about like karma and destiny and reincarnation and all these things, and it just handles it all so well. And all those things really are kind of about how just the difficulty of being human. Do you know what I mean? Just sort of like dealing with being human. And
there's kind of a reincarnation theme in the way that the two leads get a new life from their old one.
Well, that's all. Go ahead. No, because I mean that's all. Like everybody basically wants that. She wants to live a normal life. The Wheel King wants to be a normal man. Do you know what I mean? Like everybody just kind of wants, except I think for like Turquoise, who God knows what she wants. But
Lord knows.
But what's his name? Was it Li Bin, the one who did the noodles? You know,
Yeah, he just wanted to make noodles, crispy
he just wanted
noodles.
to make noodles. He just wanted to open a noodle shop with his wife. You know, his wife was so lovely, and they had a child, and like, you know, that's all he. Obviously, that was all he really cared about at that point. And
there's a lot of characters like that where like they're not really villainous; they're just in the role of villains, like the bad ends.
But what's so good about that is when his character, like, there's this really crucial scene where the magician decides to betray Wheel King, and is like, hey, the three of us can team up on Wheel King, and we can I'll take the Bodhi. You Li Bin, you can go and make noodles and take the money. And Drizzle, you can go and live your life as a normal person with your husband. And, you know, if we just team up together. And Li Bin is sort of the deciding factor in that conflict. He's the one who sits on the sidelines and is weighing the fight as it happens and making his choice. And you can tell, because you know about the noodle scene, that's ultimately what he's thinking of. Which side should I ally with so that I can get back to my wife and child and open my noodle shop? And it just, I feel like it's really easy to understand what all the characters are doing and why they're doing it. And it didn't, like in a lot of these movies, you will have sort of that shifting alliance scene where suddenly somebody changes sides for some reason, and it almost undercuts the character's original depiction leading up to that point in the film.
Right, because at that point it's the script intervening to make them more interesting instead of them being an outgrowth of their actual character motivation. That never happens in this movie. The writing is way too good. I like to point out, they does kind of pull a bait and switch on you in this movie, and I do really admire it for this, because it starts off with, oh, whoever has the Bodhi's remains can change the martial world. Yeah. But at the end, you're right. They're all just fighting to have a normal life. No one gives a crap about the martial world. They want to leave.
Yeah. I mean, even Wheel King, he just wants to be a normal guy. I mean, granted, he's probably going to still want to, you know, be a functional member of the martial world, but
get that fat stacks from the Mandarins.
But yeah. So I don't know. I to me, it's like you know. I mentioned The Bride with White Hair because that to me is a perfect wuxia film, and I think this nicely pairs with it, and it you know it sort of and again, because it gets into that spiritual stuff, it kind of has like a touch of Zen element to it that I really like. Like there's you know, which is a movie we should probably cover at some point. It's a long movie though, so I don't know, but that's like, to me, that's like the benchmark of a wuxia film that gets into spiritual themes, but they make you work to get there. You know what I mean? It's not an easy viewing.
I think a lot of people that I talk to around here in the Midwest have a very different idea of Buddhism and like Eastern spirituality than actually exists, because like having studied it for most of my life, like there is no easy way out when it comes to redeeming yourself and gaining enlightenment and trying to sever your karmic ties. This stuff's hard. This movie does a really good job of actually showing, like, hey, look, you're going to bury everything about yourself to get to this point, and it's going to be a savage burial.
Yeah, no, it does do a good job of that. And also it has, I don't know, just like you had mentioned that you could have used more action scenes, and I can understand why, because there's this lull in the middle of the movie where the love story is playing out. But I feel like that's so essential to the film that...
It is.
That because you have the charming auntie lady, the woman who basically helps to arrange their marriage, right? I just found her delightful, and I wanted to ask a question about that character, because there's almost this implication that she's like a magic woman. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I don't know if that's her being magical or if she's just super good at planning stuff. Like, and it's nice to have that kind of ambiguity.
Yeah, because at certain points in the film, you're like, wait, can this old lady summon rain? Can she make Ashung appear out of nowhere? Like, you know, or she just know? Does she have like she's either really intelligent or she... But every time I watch the movie, I'm like, wait, how magical is this lady really supposed to be? Is she like a bodhisattva or something? Like, what's going on here? Do you know what I mean?
It's clear. I like to think that she's just really smart and good at arranging stuff, because that makes sense for a matchmaker to have that kind of like scholarly... I know enough to seem like I can predict the future kind of vibe. That's my take on it, but you're right, it is ambiguous.
I think she's a bodhisattva. I think she's supposed to be a bodhisattva in this movie.
That would make sense if she was a bodhisattva, because that would kind of that means she's kind of like arranging that new path for the characters out of their old life.
She's helping them to get over these, because again, the whole thing that their love is doing is it's sort of relinquishing them to the attachments of that past that they had. You know what I mean? Like, he's bound up in his desire for revenge for his family, and she's, bound up in the killing of the family. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's so...
yeah, they're both kind of haunted by that same night. Oh, man.
And then there's that scene where, like, the Buddhist master is whipping her and saying, the mind that's like attached to the past, the mind that's attached to the present, the mind that's attached to the future, just like let it all go. Do you know what I mean? And he says that when she asks him, "Can I go and be a normal person?" And that's like his answer. Do you know what I mean?
That answer is such a frustrating answer because he doesn't really give her a straightforward like, "Yeah, go ahead." Which is what he's actually saying in the final run of things. He's saying, like, why are you worrying about a past you can't change and a future you can't know with a present that you should be living in? Just come on, just let it go. Like, that's really all he's saying. But the way he says it is in this kind of obtuse, clearly trying to teach you a lesson sort of way, which is the same way she learns her sword techniques too, for the record.
But he's also beating her when he says it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
he's
he
also,
didn't fuck around.
Yeah, no. So I think there's like this added dimension of he's not saying it's going to be easy. Do you know what I mean? Like she's trying like the relinquishing of these attachments is a painful process, like you were saying, and so it kind of gets into that. It's not touchy feely lovey dovey. It's a very difficult process that she's undergoing. It's not like you just hit a reset button and everything's back to normal. And again, I mean, think of all the things she's had to do over the course of the movie. She had to reconstruct her face.
That was at the very start of the movie, and that is brutal because, like, the doctor she goes to is like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to stuff these drugs in your sinus cavities, and we're going to put these insect larvae in there. When they grow, they're going to eat away the bone over the course of several months, and then you'll look totally different. And, like, it sets all that up, and then it shows her lying there with, like, this mask thing around her face, just lying there perfectly still with these insects burning. And you get this sense of just how horrible this whole process is for the months it takes these bugs to eat her facial bones away.
And just for people who I'm going to spoil some things that are crucial. So for the people who haven't seen the movie, you might want to stop here if you haven't seen it, or I don't know, maybe you don't care. But
it's worth not getting spoiled. So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, because Ah Chung, it turns out, is at the start of the movie they kill this magistrate and they kill his son, and importantly she encounters the son over a bridge and kills him again.
Oh hell,
because
that's not she.
Yeah, and then that's when she meets Wisdom, the Buddhist priest. But she thinks that the son has been killed. She stabs him in the heart. She doesn't realize, like you said, that his organs are reversed. And so he falls into the river, and we find out later he's saved by the same doctor that she goes to reconstruct her face. And they both get facial reconstructive surgery, essentially, which I think is a beautiful example of like a really well-done anachronism in an ancient setting, because you don't really question it, even though they're basically bringing in this highly modern procedure of facial reconstructive surgery where they're able to build a new face on the person. Which, I mean, it's even like more advanced than what we're capable of doing. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, it's significantly more so.
Yeah. So, but they just do a really great job of explaining it because once he mentions the insects, you're like, well, that kind of does sound plausible given the setting, and and also incredibly painful. And then your mind kind of wanders more towards that than questioning the premise. And so, but the thing is, both these characters get their faces redone, and then they end up meeting each other again in Luoyang and getting married. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a really interesting plot to me, the way that this unfolds. And
the reason that it's good not to spoil that is because, first of all, I didn't think of that character again, and I don't think most of the audience did after he fell off the bridge. It really felt like that was just the tail end of the scene where she's getting the body's remains. And that was right before she met Wisdom, and Wisdom feels like the important element of that whole sequence. So when they meet each other later, she doesn't know who he is or who he was, because who he is now is just this dung sweeping, messenger guy. He just does a bunch of odd jobs. So she has like a little clothes shop, and they fall in love and get married. And you, as an audience member, have been following her, so you know she used to be an assassin. You know she's a total badass. And so for the first like half, 2/3 of the movie, it really feels like the adventures of Wonder Woman and this chump she married. Because she keeps trying to protect him from the assassins who are closing in on them.
And she even tests his kung fu at some point. She hires a guy to punch him when he delivers a message, and I think she's trying to measure whether he's going to actually, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, and he just takes the punch because he doesn't give a crap. He doesn't know this guy. And so he comes running over, and he's got a black eye, and she's like, "Oh, he's just a loser. Cool, let's get married." So that's the first 2/3 of the movie, and I would like to point out it is perfectly satisfying. If that was the whole movie, I'd be totally satisfied. But they make it even better, because later on, when she's finally like severely wounded by fighting off, like, what is it, all 3 assassins? And it's everyone but the magician basically turns on her in that scene, and she gets hideously wounded by her ex-master, who taught her some kung fu wrong so that he would have weaknesses he could exploit in her style. And she's like bleeding and cut up, and she staggers back home. And like, again, audience not knowing any better, he puts her to bed. And then all the assassins show up, and they're all like, boasting around like, well, we're just going to kill her. Fuck you. Who wants to die first? So taking the whetstone that we saw telegraphed earlier, just puts it down, and he digs up these 2 swords and starts sharpening them. And then they start this other kung fu fight, and it's kind of revealed that it's like, wow, this guy's a huge badass.
Yep.
The hell did this come from?
But they laid the groundwork for that. Literally, they show him placing the brick early in the film where he put the sword. Do you know what I mean? And you get a lot of hints of that. You even see it in the bank robbery scene, because remember, both he and Michelle Yeoh are debilitated with a paralytic strike, and the bank robbers and the bank robbers start killing everybody because they have to make an escape, and they're working their way down the line towards them. And you're just thinking of it from Michelle Yeoh's perspective, who's trying to conceal who she is, and she's biding her time. But what you almost don't notice is that Ah Shung gets up, and he's hobbled, like he clearly is like resisting whatever paralytic thing has an effect on him, but nobody else in that room is able to do that. Do you know what I mean? The fact that he can even get up like that suggests that, and I think if you rewatch that scene, what's clear to me is he was about to spring into action when she stepped in. Do you know what I mean? She steps in to protect him, and she doesn't realize that he's just about to do what she ends up doing.
Yeah, she was like a half step ahead of him. So, yeah, and there's a lot of little foreshadow things like that are subtle enough that if you're not on that page with the movie, they'll go over your head like they did with me. Because like the whole time I was like in that scene, I thought he was just being a heroic dullard, basically. That he's going to get himself killed, and she saved his life. But the reality is that he had a good plan.
And the film rewards reviewing for that reason. Because the first time I saw it, that was my reaction to that scene. But then when I saw it this time, I was like, wait a second, he's getting up, and like nobody got up. And I mean, like it just you start to realize, oh, he was about to do something in that scene.
It's another thing too, like whenever she knocks him down, it's an attack from behind, which he couldn't have seen coming. And when they hit him with the paralytic strike, it's not exactly in the same place they hit everybody else with it. Like, he moves so they hit him in the shoulder bone instead of a little further down the collar. Which, by the way, immediately made me think about Wonder Heroes of Ogre Gate, because you guys have that paralytic strike thing that really only works against civilians and incapacitated opponents. So, like, I was immediately like, I see where they got the inspiration for that.
Well, that's it. That's in like it's so common in the genre, the paralytic 3-tapping, but also his organs are reversed, so who knows whether which they again that's all just so perfectly handled. Even at the last scene, which I know you wanted to talk about, where she stabs him where the heart would normally be, but we know his heart is reversed, and leaves him to appear dead so Wheel King can be dealt with, and she gets revenge on his behalf.
Yeah, again, there's layer upon layer of facets of this movie, because the poison she uses on him to perfectly paralyze him is the same poison that Wheel King uses on Turquoise earlier. And he buries her, then digs her back up to recruit her to the 3 Black Stones. in that same scene where she uses that against him, stabs him on the proper heart side where his heart is not, making him appear dead. It's essentially the same ploy to fool the Wheel King, but we're interspersed with a shot of him actually literally burying Turquoise because he's really mad at her for the whole revelation of him being a eunuch thing.
And it is like a really full circle for her character, like you said, because when she's introduced, she's buried and then he digs her up and then he reburies her. And I think so much of the film has that quality to it. Just everything feels just sort of perfectly circular. Do you know what I mean? Right down to the villain, whose name is Wheel King. He's one of the 10 Kings of Hell and is in charge of in the movie. He claims that like his namesake is the one who assigns people's rebirth. Do you know what I mean? Like that's so. The villain of the movie represents sort of the karmic wheel that they're all sort of operating under.
Yeah. Really fantastic, and like he does represent that literally for her character, because he is essentially the person that enforces the karma of being an assassin on her. So it's only overcoming her karma enforced by the Wheel King in a metaphorical and physical sense that she can ever be free of it. Like, there's just so much to appreciate there.
And one cool detail is his sword has that little wheel on it that he spins every time he's about to attack somebody. And it just sort of, I don't know, it just looks really cool, I think, but it also kind of connects to that theme of he's the one distributing sort of the karmic, I guess, karmic justice in a way, you could say.
That's the function of the Wheel King, which, by the way, when they first said the name, the Wheel King, I was 100% sold on watching the rest of the movie. A lot of movies, like, you'll watch them and they'll never give you that one moment until like you've watched the whole thing, you get to digest it, where you're like, I did like that. No. As soon as his name popped on the screen, I was like, Wheel King?
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah, there's some good names in this movie. I also like the magician character who's got the flaming swords and just uses all these like really interesting tricks. I think at one point he actually uses the rope trick, right? Doesn't he ascend into the it might be a deleted scene. It might not be in this one, but I know I've seen a scene of this guy
climbing a magic rope.
Yeah, I think so. I could be wrong. But yeah, so I think we should talk about this in terms of gaming, because
there's a lot to appreciate in the movie itself, but yeah, there were a few things in this one that really translated well to gaming. The whole organ reversal thing is the first one I'd like to point out, where it's such a strange, obscure little character detail. Like, you could see that in a lot of build systems like Hero System or something like that, where or even like Legend of the Five Rings, with his list of benefits and flaws. Reverse organs is one of those things that's almost both, because a doctor would have difficulty treating you at the same time that an assassin would have difficulty killing you, because they're not exactly certain where to strike.
Yep.
That's neat. It's neat, and it's gameable in this little kind of subtle way, and it goes to highlight just how big of an impact what is effectively a 1 or 2 point character trait can be, because the whole plot about him revolves around his organs being reversed several times.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the game how it would be dealt with. I guess the way that I would probably deal with it in Ogre Gate is there's a rule that characters can control whether they are using a controlled strike to not kill you, or whether they're using a lethal strike to kill you when they deliver enough damage that would put you over the edge. And I would probably have it be reversed in cases with characters like that. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, you're right, because you'd be hitting the wrong side in either case.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a pretty simple solution, but there's all kinds of ways you can handle it.
That's elegant in a way that actually makes it something that could be really central to a game, because what if the assassin wanted to gloat at them? So they were like, I'm just going to put a paralyzing strike on this guy. Oh, he died.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, and
that guy was important.
I mean, unless, of course, the person knew. Then if they knew, they would allow it. But otherwise, I think it would have to be reversed, because you think you're dealing with the opposite arrangement of organs in the body. And so...
Even if it's so easy to make the mistake. I'm a big fan of the Metal Gear Solid series. The second one was not the strongest entry, but there was a cool character who had that same thing where her organs were reversed. So at one point, she gets betrayed by this guy whose MO is literally, I will always betray you. He's the gunslinger guy. And he shoots her in the chest to kill her. He's super good with shooting bullets. Like, that's his whole thing, is his name Revolver Ocelot. He's got a revolver, and he's really good with it. So he shoots her in the heart, and he's like, hey, you're going to die. I'm going to get in this giant robot and kill you. And she stands back up to try and kick his ass. And he's like, oh, right, your heart's on the other side. Forgot about that.
Stuff like
so
that.
Easy to make that mistake.
No, stuff like that's really cool. And it's really, it explains that opening scene on the bridge so well. So, you know, and they even make the sound of his heart beating she feels it through the vibration of the sword, it seems like. But another reason I think this is good for gaming is, like, I'm working on a dark wuxia RPG, and to me this is a really good example of dark wuxia. It's inspired by Gulong, and this is a movie where they're burying people alive, where where, like we said, the woman has, this horrible facial reconstructive surgery that's incredibly painful. The main character kills a child in one of the first scenes in the movie, not the very first scene, but like at the start of the movie, one of her first actions, without hesitation, is to kill a child, which is always a big no-no in movies, right? Like, that's like something that that's sort of one of those lines, but it's not done in a way that feels like, we just killed a kid. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like
Right, it doesn't feel like mustache twirling. It just feels like, kind of a wrong place, wrong time scenario. Like, the thing that's a little more morally reprehensible, I think, from a Chinese perspective, is brought up really explicitly in the movie, which is she kills the guy's dad.
Yep.
They later get married and fall in love and everything, and he figures this out, and he's holding a sword to her throat, and he's like, you killed my father, how could I ever forgive you? The Confucian, paternalism thing is huge in China. So, you mess with somebody's parents, that's a death sentence right there.
Well, I think it did a really good job of handling it, and I thought that, again, that's where, I was talking about the emotional weight of the movie, that's where, a lot of the emotional weight is coming from with their relationship towards the end. That's, and it's him getting over that grudge that I find so overwhelming when I watch it. That's the part that, it
is overwhelming. It's almost unbelievable, and it really, that last fight scene really kind of drives home just how difficult it is to get over something like that. But anyway, going back to it being a very dark wuxia, true, very dark.
No, and I just think it's a good example if you want some some darker material to sort of draw inspiration from. This is good, and one of the ways that I used it, and it's going to work its way into a module that eventually I'll be releasing, but who knows when it'll come out. But I had how they have the Bodhidharma, they have the corpse of the monk who brought Kung Fu to China. And he's kind of like this desiccated husk, right? And in this one, he's cut into two halves, right? That's sort of one of the things that makes it a challenge, is the bottom half and the top half are separate. But when I saw that scene, I was like, wait, what if, in a gaming setting like I run, supernatural stuff can totally exist. So what if he was more like an undead creature of some kind that was just really slow and in a hibernated state? Do you know what I mean?
So you put it back together, he starts eating your chi or something.
So in the Wandering Heroes of Ogre setting, our version of Shaolin is the Sun Mai sect, and there's a character named Sun Mai who is sort of a friend of one of the of Sunan and Bao, the great heroes in the past, the backstory of the setting. And so and he's sort of in the novel version of the setting. He became kind of the breakthrough Fonzie-like character. Like, he was the guy he was just kind of a wild, humorous character who eventually becomes enlightened by the end of the story, but it's a really long path for him. And so he's very charming. He's kind of a con man when it opens up. And I decided, what if I had Sun Mai become this thing? He sort of become like, there's this concept in the game of the Pure Ones. He could become like a Pure One, but like he's the true king of the Pure Ones. He's this okay, you know how like in Chinese mythology, when people become immortal, it often says that they shed their mortal coil and then they ascend. What if this is the moral coil that remained behind when Sun Mai became immortal? Do you know what I mean? This is the desiccated corpse. That's all the leftover attachments and resentments and evils of Sun Mai that he let go when he became immortal. And And so what I have is this sort of wicked, lich-like version of Sun Mai that kind of needs to be carried around by people. He needs to be able to manipulate people to his uses. And most of the time, he just pretended to be a corpse, and so he became a relic, like in the movie. And at one point in the campaign, my players were hired to pilfer him. Do you know what I mean? And they just thought, oh, he's just like this ancient relic. And as they're carrying him out of the compound, he starts whispering in one of their ears, and says like, hey, why don't you take me to this hill over here and let's talk business. I wanna make an arrangement with you. And it became this whole thing. But he was really powerful, so he also was this potentially deadly villain in the campaign. So I know that was the adventure that I got out of the.
That's cool though. I like that. I may just have to steal that, sir. Of course, I'd be stealing it from 2 places now. So,
but it worked. It worked really well. It was, and also what was cool about it was it kind of presents the players with a choice. Like, do we want to align ourselves with this powerful undead creature that we're carrying around that's offering us it's offering us things to if we assist it, or do we want to work against it because it's evil and nefarious? And I ran multiple parties through that campaign. Like, I had the material and I was playtesting it, and everybody responded differently to Sun Mai. Some people embraced Sun Mai and began working for him. Some people immediately rejected Sun Mai and tried to destroy him. And some people embraced him with the aim of ultimately betraying him down the road. So
that's one of those great little, like, I don't even know what you'd call that, because like it's a little like decision point thing where there's a lot of different ways you could react to that. And you're right, like every party, every character is going to have their own dynamic kind of crystallize around the event. That's one of those like almost perfect pieces of prep, I want to say. Like I want to praise that pretty highly, because like there's almost infinite ways that it could go, but there's one really good, easy way to introduce it. Like, you don't have to prep more than just that guy, really, in the situation. They find this desiccated corpse. It starts basically trying to cut deals with them, and they realize it's an ancient evil being. Now what? That's like a perfect example of that adage about the person who thinks of the problem shouldn't think of the solution.
Yeah.
It's so much more fun to have the players be like, well, this happens. Now what you going to do?
No, and that's what's cool about it, because I found I could introduce him in all kinds of different ways. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes parties would find rumors about him, and then they would realize, and they would seek him out to steal him and sell him. Some groups would be assigned that by somebody else. Some groups would just encounter people that happen to have him. Do you know what I mean? They're like, other people might be seeking him in the setting. So I had a group that had recently acquired Sun Mai that they bumped into at one point. Like there were different ways to introduce him, but it was like a catalyst for any kind of adventure after that. So it was interesting, but none of it ever felt predetermined.
That's really cool.
But another thing that I guess we could talk about is inter-party conflict, because that is a component of the movie. Is sort of
there's a lot of betrayal in this movie. There's a lot of betrayal, and also like there's a lot of examples of how you don't have to make betrayal boring. Like a lot of cases, I encounter people who have this kind of mindset where, oh, betrayal will make it interesting, and so they make a character to betray, and I think that's sort of missing the point of what makes betrayal interesting and satisfying. You were talking earlier, I don't know, this might have actually been before we started recording, but you were talking earlier about like the scene where everyone's fighting in the courtyard, and the magician all of a sudden realizes that he's getting a really raw deal because he's sick and dying, and Wheel King's been exploiting him his whole life. So he's like, well, why don't I take the Bodhi's body and heal myself, and then you can go back and live with your husband normal life because Wheel King will be dead, and then you can get all of his money and bribe money and start your noodle shop, and he'll be dead and everything will be great. And so the assassin guy sets it out, magician starts fighting, and then Zur shows up and starts kind of matching blades and wits with our main character. And like, that's one of those, there's so much about the betrayals in that scene that are rooted in the character's motivations. Yeah. It wasn't like the screenwriter was like, and then a sudden unexpected betrayal will happen. the betrayal is an outgrowth of their characters following the natural arc of their progression. That's wonderful. And it's okay, I think, for that to happen in a role-playing game. I think that we as GMs and we as players of role-playing games, really, we understand that they are inherently cooperative exercises. Yeah. And so when you have a moment where two players are going to come to blows in characters or in character, like, there's this kind of I have this really strong tendency to kind of intervene and make them talk it out. And I've gotten to the point lately where I'm just like, nah, kill each other. Let's see what happens. Because if they're genuinely both role-playing their characters, or however many people are role-playing their characters, and this conflict is something that is arising not out of an out-of-game frustration, but out of an in-game conflict and motivation that's escalating to this point of violence, you almost, like, you want it to happen. You want to see that play out, because even though it is a cooperative exercise, on a metagame level, we are agreeing to sort of resolve our differences by a clash of swords and characters. So there's that agreement and that cooperation never really vanishes, even though the characters are in a direct, like, zero-sum life or death conflict.
I think when it comes to inter-party conflict, especially if it's between players, the important thing is to know that everybody's on the same page with it. That's what I've always discovered. I have run games where it's worked great. I have run games where it hasn't worked so great because people weren't on the same page. And so I think the key is make sure that everybody is on the same page. And as a GM, I'm not usually too big into, like, the GM managing players like children. I tend to treat my players as adults. But but I feel like this is one of those times that you probably do want to keep an eye out for any social cues that something's amiss, because it's
Sure.
It sort of goes against one of the default assumptions many people carry with them into a game. And so if one character is trying to attack another and that person is really troubled by it, you want to pick up on that, because it'll lead to problems in the campaign over time if you don't.
There is an undeniable social element to running games, and I have the conceit that you are playing with your friends at the heart of this.
Yeah.
If you're not playing with your friends, being able to read the social cues is much more difficult. So if you get a problem player just because you've introduced someone as a player that you don't know very well as a person, like, the problem is much deeper than sometimes can be dealt with at the table. Because, like, if you've invited someone to your campaign, like, on one of your friends' recommendations, and they just all of a sudden in the middle of the campaign decide, like, okay, I'm going to stab everybody else since they're wounded and I was in the back, take the treasure and run off, like, the problem was much deeper than the game, and it was a fundamental, like, lack of communication and trust way before the game started. So, like, that's not what I'm talking about here. My point is that if you're gaming with your friends and they are on the same page, then you shouldn't shepherd them. You should definitely intervene if someone's being a tool out of character.
Yeah, no, and I'm just pointing out that line can sometimes be, because sometimes a person's being a tool simply because they're not on the same page as everybody else. Not that their behavior would be tool-like if everybody were on that page. Do you know what I mean? So that's the point.
Intentional versus an unintentional tool.
Yeah.
Yes. And with either case, I think it's important to clarify if they're being intentionally a tool or not, because even if they're being intentionally a tool, I think that it's possible to have a good game come out of it. I don't know that that's a universal solution for every table, but a lot of cases, like, I actually had a friend whose favorite thing to do in games was betray the whole party. And since we all knew that going into the game, even though he was intentionally going to screw us over at one point, it sort of made it fun. There was like a mini game going on in the background of every game. So, yeah.
It can totally work. I mean, again, I think both of us tend to play with our friends, so it's not like we have the, it's not like running at a convention where you're doing it with strangers and there's this big gulf between you and them in terms of, assumptions. But I do think that it can add a lot of spice to a campaign when you allow for inter-party conflict. I think that you just don't want to make it a necessity. You just where it can be very interesting is, especially in campaigns that get to a level where intrigue becomes a possibility. Say once player characters start acquiring power of any kind, or they are important members of an organization like Darkstone. That's when it becomes interesting because it's when you have that question mark of, well, what is Joe really thinking here? Like, what's he planning? Is he really offering to help me, or is he gonna stab me when I walk in the alley with him and then take the bodhi from me? Like, there's a
can I trust this guy or not? That's a powerful element to add into a game.
I will mention a movie again, Duel for Gold by Cho Yuen. People should check that movie out. It's a really good example of what a party looks like that doesn't trust each other. It's kind of like a Hateful Eight type situation, but early '70s wuxia, and it's got it's a really, really well made film as well. So I'd recommend people checking it out in addition to this movie, because this movie also kind of gets at that same sort of thing in the center of it.
A few times I was watching this movie, I was getting kind of a Pulp Fiction, Quentin Tarantino vibe out of it. So I think that whole, and I think it's because the characters fundamentally cannot trust each other. Yeah. And so there's a sort of audience and character level tension that's shared. Tarantino's a master of that. He does that all the time.
Well, and also he was inspired by a lot of wuxia and kung fu movies. Do you know what I mean? So it kind of makes sense. Like, I'm willing to bet that I'm not 100% positive, but I have a feeling he probably has seen Duel for Gold. Do you know what I mean? I have to imagine he has. So, and also in this movie, I can see where you would think that, because there's like the bank robbery scene, there's the betrayal scene. There's just again, like you said, the sense that you don't know how far these characters can trust each other. There's also sort of like the psycho femme fatale character. You know what I mean?
She was a very Tarantino character. No, the scene that nailed it for me was whenever the three black stones come for her, and they're fighting her, and then Wheel King steps in. And he's like, "Whoa, wait a minute! Let's all just cooperate. We'll all get what we want out of this." And they have that moment of raw tension, and they draw that thing out like a knife. And I was like, "This is such a Tarantino moment. This shit could happen in a Tarantino movie." Yeah.
A lot. That's, again. Usually, I'm one of these people that I want action in my wuxia movies, and you even point out there's kind of a lull in the action in the film.
Just a little bit more, man.
But I feel like one of the things I like about this movie is kind of like a Tarantino film. The sort of dialogue moments and the moments of tension are the really interesting aspects to it. You like just that, even the scene where when he walks into the house, when Ashung walks in the house and Turquoise has got naked and gone into the bed. That's like what's very cool about that scene is it goes in a direction I did not expect it to go in the direction it went. It totally surprised me. Because instead you think, well, he's either going to start shouting at her, or he's going to be seduced by her, or something. Like, what's going to happen, or she's going to attack him. But
I thought, and this is where the movie was really able to pull the wool over my eyes. I thought that was going to be the scene where we would know for certain if this guy was a kung fu master or not. I was like, okay, he's going to have to fight this chick. She's super good at fighting. That's all been telegraphed. So either he's going to be a kung fu master, or he's going to try to do the right thing and get killed. One of two things. It's got to happen. Neither happens.
Yep.
He finds a way to dissolve the diffuse situation by just being clever.
He picks up her clothes, he runs out and says, "There's a naked crazy woman in my bed. Everybody come look." Yeah. It's like it's such a jiu-jitsu move, but it was so it was really a surprise. That was one of the that moment always stands out in my mind. And there's a lot of scenes like that in the movie, I feel. So we always talk about how simple this film is, but it really is kind of surprising in a lot of ways. And
it's a little bit sophisticated, and that's something that's really important about it. You can have a simple premise or a simple plot or a simple idea and simply pull it off with a huge amount of aplomb and a lot of depth and layers to your thinking, and it elevates it and makes it something really explosively fantastic. That's a good way to describe this movie.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The raw plot chunks are, like you said, they're so simple. Everything about it is just this little simple thing, a little simple metaphor, a little simple character scene.
Well, it's all character driven too. It's all character. It's all character driven. It's all about what the characters want and what they're doing, and it's a great way to sort of structurally think of a campaign. If the characters are sufficiently motivated and have their goals, and your NPCs, if you have an NPC like Wheel King, you know what Wheel King wants. Do you know what I mean? You know how to use Wheel King. If you have a character like the Magician, you know how to use the Magician. You know how to use all these characters that they introduce over the course of the film. And I think if the PCs are, rooted in the campaign in some way, you can it doesn't have to play out like it plays out in this movie. But if all of the characters are free to sort of, just be the chemical reaction that they are in the game, it'll go in interesting directions, I think. Do you know what I mean? That's sort of, it sort of really encapsulates, like I always liken, like a good character-driven adventure kind of just naturally comes to a head on its own. Do you know what I mean? Because everybody is, and that's sort of what happens in this film. The motivations all lead them to intersect in really dramatic ways.
I don't know, maybe to re-examine how much I like this movie. Because, like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, there was a lot of nuance there. Usually I love nuanced flicks, but, like, I gotta tell you, like, maybe it's just my own prejudice. I want to go into, like, especially with a martial arts movie, a wuxia movie, like, I really am in it at a base level for the crazy kung fu and the magic stuff. Like, I love that stuff. And I think that actually might be a different genre. I think that's what they call tianxia or xiaoxia or something like that. It's the, like, immortals using super kung fu magic genre.
Yeah.
Something like, is it the Zhu Warriors, something like that?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's like that's what Wuxia World specializes in. They have translations of Shansha novels that are really high level of power. That's a whole subgenre of itself. But with this movie is much more firmly rooted in wuxia for sure. The closest we get to any kind of magical stuff is the Bodhi and the magician. But there's always enough ambiguity that you're never really sure. Is it real magic? Is it fake magic? Is it just a legend or a rumor?
Do you think that ambiguity is an important element of it too? Because it never really crests far past a very believable level of capability for anyone or any element. So, like, I think that's important for wuxia. I think it has to kind of, like, it's necessarily restricted. Like, again, because you wouldn't watch Die Hard and judge it on whether or not it was, like, a superhero movie. Mm-hmm. You got to appreciate Die Hard for what it is. We don't expect Bruce Willis to pop adamantium claws and start shredding people. We're doing something different here. And it's great. Like, I'm not going to complain about getting Die Hard. In a lot of ways, this movie was kind of like the wuxia equivalent of Die Hard, where it was a little grittier. It didn't really go zany. So, like, I've got my preference. I definitely prefer the crazy, zany, laser eyeballs kind of movie. But it's not entirely fair for me to be like, well, it's, Die Hard didn't have superpowers, which I think is kind of what I'm doing here.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Well, I feel like what this movie felt like to me when I saw it felt like a really refreshing film. Do you know what I mean? Because I felt like it. I don't know. There was just something about it that it was classic enough. It had all the classic wuxia elements, but it was doing stuff that I hadn't seen really done to the extent that it was done. Like just the way it handles the love story to me felt a little bit different. The way it emphasized the spiritual themes spiritual themes come up in wuxia movies, but the way it was done here also felt different. I think it was just a really well done movie, well acted, with a really great sense of what it wanted to be. Do you know what I mean? You picture this movie and you immediately picture the tone of the shots and the atmosphere and the music, and it all just is cohesive and it's a clear vision. Do you know what I mean? Like when I think of Touch of Zen, that's a clear vision. That's the director had a really clear image in his head of what he wanted to achieve, and he achieved it. Now you can quibble over the results, but he definitely gets what he wants. And I feel like this is that kind of movie. There was a very stark vision that was realized, and I don't think that's easy to do because a lot of movies don't do that. Do you know what I mean?
No, this movie definitely did what it set out to do, and it did something that is extremely impressive, which is it in no way defied the tropes of the genre. It's almost like you said, perfectly classically wuxia. But what it did defy was all of your expectations about how those things were going to manifest, what they were going to mean, and what the outcomes were going to be. Yeah, that's an impressive balancing act.
And I think again, and it wasn't afraid to get into the emotional content and make that like. It's easy to have a love scene that's emotional and compelling, right? It's not easy to have fight scenes that are emotionally compelling. Do you know what I mean? Like that, the scene with Wisdom is is one of the more moving scenes in the movie. The opening when she's fighting with wisdom. Do you know what I mean? That's not an easy thing to pull off. You have the choreography has to be right. And again, I think that's another reason why I'm frequently comparing this to Bride with White Hair, because that's another movie where the emotional beats of the film really kind of hit you during the fight scenes. Do you know what I mean? Like it's able to sort of weave the emotional threads into the action in a way that's
and
really
Bride with White Hair did a really good job of that too. I concur. So yeah, that scene's really good. That particular fight scene, really, a lot of the fight scenes have an unexpected dimension to them that draws you in a lot more than the fight scene itself. And I think that maybe that's the root of my complaint, even though I admire it and did enjoy it, is that I do want the action and the fight scenes to be the important thing. I don't think that, because in Bride with White Hair, they did a good job of balancing the tension and the stakes and the movements of the fight itself with the emotional resonance. Yeah. And this one, I feel like it was unbalanced in favor of the emotional resonance. Like the scene we were talking about earlier, the Tarantino scene, where they fight and then there's this wonderfully drawn-out moment of tension where you're not sure if they're going to keep fighting or if they're going to strike an uneasy alliance. That completely overwhelms the action in that scene.
But the action's still really good. The action is like the scene with Drizzle where she's fighting with those people in the village at the start. That's a great action scene. And the scene in the bank with Michelle Yeoh, that's a tremendous action scene.
I think the bank is one of the best action scenes in the movie. Is even though it's quick, and it is a little too quick for my taste. Mm-hmm. Even though it's quick, it's extremely dense and rich, and so you're not really disappointed in it.
But the other thing is that they're specifically modeling this after Gulong, and if you read a Gulong story, there's a lot of different wuxia novelists, but if we want to compare Louis Cha and Gulong, who are two of the big ones, Louis Cha tends to have these epic battles that will play out over 2 chapters sometimes, like the 2 chapters of the book, and I'm talking long chapters. I'm not talking short little chapters here. Will be fighting. There'll be action scenes.
Yeah, that's my jam right there.
But Gulong is a little bit more Japanese in style. He'll have these scenes that are this big buildup of tension, and then sudden violent action, and then silence, and then death on the ground. Do you know what I mean? It's like a very sort of...
it's a very Kurosawa kind of...
Yeah, very much so.
Again, I'm not going to complain about a Kurosawa film. But even in a Kurosawa film, take The Seven Samurai, some of the best action in that movie doesn't follow that formula. Some of the best action is drawn out and muddy, and the characters have obvious panic or terror or triumph, and there's a lot more squeaky nuance and detail to it that makes it a little less clean. It's not all. And I think it's to contrast with the ideal version of it, because the ideal Japanese version of it, especially in Kurosawa's stuff, he puts in that very movie, which is, it's a calm, a strike, and then finality, and that doesn't happen in that movie at all. It's intentionally defying your expectations, but I like it. I like that muddier version because I find, first of all, it's a little more agreeable to me in the sense of it being a little more close to life, and second of all, there's just more detail and nuance to it.
But my point was that this is more in the model of the Gulong sort of.
Yeah, fight, I get the point.
And I don't want to oversell it, because it's not like these fights look like Japanese samurai, like the ideal version of a Japanese samurai.
No, they're much.
Yeah, it's very Chinese, but it's just that the fights do tend to be a little bit more efficient, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, they're more sudden and violent. It's more like getting stabbed in the night or getting ambushed than it is this kind of drawn out strategic thing.
But they do have plenty. There's still plenty of meat to chew on, and I feel like they do a good job of getting the emotive qualities of the characters. There's that moment when they're having the battle between the magician and the rest of the Darkstone group, when the magician realizes that he's in deep trouble, and you see it on his face. And I think that's a real good sort of moment in the fight. And then there's the moment when the Wheel King explicitly says that to him. He says, "Look, I've been telling you forever. You insist on mixing your magic and your kung fu and blending them together. You need to pick one or the other." And it's like everything crystallizes in that moment. You're like, "Oh, great shit! Like, the Wheel King has devoted himself to mastering his martial arts. This guy has been splitting it 50-50, and now he's going to pay the price.
And that's a good character-driven moment, and the acting is forefront in that, but it makes the action a very secondary concern. And like, I'd contrast that with, say, the fight scenes in Five Element Ninja, where they're much zanier, granted, but you have characters like the ninja, and so when they go to take them down, there's all these other tactical dimensions that make the fight itself center stage, and that's my preference. Like, that's the kind of stuff
I would disagree a little bit, and the thing is, keep in mind, I'm somebody who I generally prefer action. Like, I'm not somebody like the movie The Assassin, when that came out, the 2015. I didn't like that movie because it was so dull. Do you know what I mean? I like movies. I like movies generally. More than action, and Touch of Zen I like because it's made by a brilliant director. But normally films that are that languid are not to my taste. I really do like the action. But what I feel this movie does well is it makes you care about the action. When that exchange happens between Wheel King and the magician, it really, like, it hooks my interest in the next attack sequence. Do you know? Because then I'm like, oh my god, the magician is in trouble, and it just engages me more in the material. I feel like that was my reaction. Like when they confront Ashung and it's revealed during the fight that he's really the son of the magistrate who they thought they killed. That fight has so much weight when that realization comes to light. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's suddenly like it's kind of like the moment in what's the movie, Fight Club, when he realizes that he's got a split personality, and that Tyler Durden is just his other, just him, and like I think literally the camera spins around him or something. There's a room spinning. Yeah. That's sort of how you feel when you're watching this scene. To be
fair, in defense of that scene's action, it's some of the best in the movie. It's fantastic fighting. It's well choreographed. There is a dimension of tactical discussion, even where he's like, "Oh, those needles aren't really good in this scenario," so they telegraph it really well. So like that scene's great fighting. So I don't really have a strong complaint with that one, aside from I just wanted a little more.
You wanted more. You wanted more quantity of the fighting. It sounds.
I did want more quantity, and I wanted it to be a little closer to being the more important thing. I really feel like the action is kind of stepping back and being like, "Whoa, we're about the characters in this movie," which is fine. The characters are great, and I do love the movie, but I really like that.
I'm gonna have to make you watch Touch of Zen one of these days. Just
damn it.
I just want to get your, because that movie, like the first half of the movie's like over 3 hours. I forget the exact time. It's a long movie,
this is gonna be brutal.
And the first half is like no action, and then the second half is like endless.
Killing me, Smalls.
It kind of builds up to one big fight. I mean, there's a little bit of stuff sporadically, but it's really, it takes its time. Like, it literally starts out with a guy who has like a shop in town where he paints people's portraits, and like, you got to sit through and watch the guy set up his shop for the day. You know what I mean? Like, there's like, it's a lot of the stuff can seem tedious on first viewing.
Interesting.
But I'm merely emphasizing the boring aspects of it, because it's one of these films that's so highly regarded, but a lot of people haven't actually seen it. So when they finally do see it, they're like, "Oh, I'm watching Touch of Zen," and they're a little surprised by how slow it is. So I just always overemphasize the slowness of it before people see
it. So that you're well prepared.
Yeah,
isn't that on Amazon Prime? Like, couldn't I watch that like in the next, like, if as soon as we wrap this up, could I immediately start watching it? I think I could.
I don't know. Let me check if that's on Amazon Prime. That's a good question.
Because like you kind of sold me on the journey of the movie, because sometimes you don't see a movie necessarily because you think you're gonna love it. Sometimes you see a movie because it sounds interesting to watch.
A Touch of Zen is on Prime Video to rent and buy. Is this? But the thing is, there have been many versions of it. Is this the remastered version? That's the big question.
Yeah, that's a question for our audience too. Like,
it's the Criterion Collection version. So
probably awesome.
So if you watch it and it looks gorgeous, you're watching the right one. If you watch it and it looks really grainy and difficult to see, then you're watching the older one. It's 170 minutes. Wait, what's 170 minutes come to?
Well, 180 is 3 hours.
I think that might. I don't know if that's right or not. I'll have to look it up after, but there is a version online that I think might be the remastered version. But what you got to understand about Touch of Zen is it's like he's trying to convey the concept of Zen through the movie visually, and it has a lot of iconic scenes. Like this is where the iconic bamboo forest scene comes from. Is A Touch of Zen.
Ooh,
you know what I mean?
Really?
Yeah. That's, but I do have to emphasize it's not an easily earned viewing. You know, there's a lot of movies you can just pop them in and watch them in an hour and a half and you're done. A Touch of Zen demands effort on the part of the viewer. Do you know what I mean?
Well, some of my favorite movies demand significant effort. For example, I hate to go back to The Godfather every time I want to say something about a good movie, but like Godfather is a good example of you need to sit there and pay attention, students. Yeah. It deserves your attention, and you should give it your attention.
Also, the book's worth reading. The book, The Godfather, is worth reading if anybody...
I still gotta read Condor Heroes, man. Like, I'm behind on my Kung Fu reading. Condor Heroes, like, I'm coming to realize that's kind of the quintessential, like, work of Wuxia is that novel. So, like, or whatever version of that novel.
Well, it's a trilogy. There's the Legend of Condor. There's like the first one, sometimes just called Eagle Shooting Heroes or Legend of Condor Heroes, and that's really lengthy. That's like reading Lord of the Rings in terms of the page length. It might even be longer. And then there's Return of Condor Heroes, which is equally as long. And then there's Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, which is also equally as long. They're usually divided into 4 volumes each. But they're worth it.
Chinese writing is like that, though. They'll be like, look, you better read the Cliff Notes, then the entire book, and then the afterthoughts on the book. And it's like this dictionary-sized book. And you're like, okay, I can do this. It's all worth your time, though. I've never read a Chinese book where I was like, I never should have read that.
Yeah, usually it feels worth it at the end. I think the Condor Heroes series is really well written. It's got some amazingly interesting characters. It has, again, usually I love action in movies, but action in books usually bores me to tears because it's really annoying watching a writer try to write an action scene over several pages. Somehow he manages to make it really interesting in the way that he weaves in the dialogue and that he keeps things fresh and interesting. It doesn't lose your interest at all. And the stories are really good. I would highly recommend people check out the Condor Heroes series for sure. In fact, it's timely because the second volume of Legend of Condor Heroes has just been translated and released. So I have a review copy right here that I need to tackle. I can't comment on this one specifically because I haven't read this version yet, but the fan translations of them are great. And the Volume 1 translation of Legend of Condor Heroes was also really good. So, I highly recommend people look into that. But yeah, Touch of Zen we could do at some point if you wanted to. That would be...
Yeah, gonna have to. After this whole thing, we absolutely have to. Because, like, and I sort of want to hear that podcast now where I'm like, oh, God, for however long it took me to have to actually, like, sit down and tell my mind to shut up and pay attention to the movie. It's necessary. You gotta discipline yourself a little bit to get the really good things out of life.
I used to have no problem watching longer movies, but now that I've been corrupted by social media and have developed that short YouTube attention span and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I have to what I find I have to do is I have to deprive myself of social media in advance of watching a movie like that.
It changes your brain chemistry when you just get off for a little while. So like, yeah, no, I feel you. Because sometimes like I'll do it too. Like this Monday I was not productive because I was like, oh hey, I'll just sit down and watch Red Letter Media for a little while. And like 4 hours later, I'm like, oh, I got to pick up my kids. Oops, should have got my reading done.
Yeah, that's always the challenge in this day and age. But Touch of Zen is, I mean, what I would recommend is maybe, can you do Prime on your TV by any chance?
Yeah, I always watch it on my TV.
Yeah, I recommend watching A Touch of Zen on a TV. I think it benefits greatly from being viewed on as large a screen as possible.
You're out a weekday at some point in the future. It's my midterms week this week, so like I was kind of crushed. But
also,
yeah.
Interesting fact: it is based on a Pu Song Ling story, on a Strange Tales story, even though you wouldn't even know it. Because if I remember, I want to say it's one. There's like a story where there's like a spider spirit that's like a swordswoman or something. I can't remember. There was some weird story I think it was based on, and I always get it confused with other stories. But but he kind of reframes it. He takes out, like, you can still see traces of the supernatural in it, but it's brought to a much more mundane level, so he can tackle the themes he wants to tackle.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
Yes.
We've been going on for. What was that?
Despite it being my preference for it to have been more about a supernatural Spider-Woman, I think that there is a strong argument to be said that would just overwhelm whatever more subtle theme you wanted to put in.
Go ahead.
No, I was done.
So I should say too that the remastered version, I think the remastering was overseen by Shu Feng, who's the actress from A Touch's End. So it's really in good hands if that's the version they have on Prime, which I'm not 100% sure if it is or not. There have been it looks like it's got the cover, but I've been deceived by Prime's slick use of the wrong cover before, so I want to be cautious
Yeah, it was,
so I'm gonna have to head out. It looks like we've been going on for a very long time. So
it's like we almost did 2 here.
Yeah,
so we did
yeah.
we wrapped up the Wuxia conversation.
Yeah.
And
All right,
with Star
we
Wars.
will continue this discussion maybe next week, and and me and Joel will head out, and I guess until then we will talk to everybody later.